I've just heard that the UN Security Council has voted 15-0 to approve an attack on Syria. But this time it's not to get rid of Assad, but to get rid of ISIS. What I don't understand is why we didn't once join in Russia and Putin when he did against ISIS. Is it because really ISIS is an instrument of the West to try to get rid of Assad? But now it just looks very stupid for the West not to go after ISIS after what they have supposedly, and I say supposedly because there's no proof, that they did the attacks on Paris. It could have been the Taliban or some other, alphabet or other kind of terrorist group. ISIS isn't a very old terrorist group, so it could be something else. We don't know. But anyway, it's taking that attack on Paris for the West to decide to actually help Assad, because Assad is not really the terrorist, it seems. So it's quite embarrassing. In terms of what happened this past week, in the wake of the terrorist attack in Paris on Friday the 13th, I remember well that the Dow dropped late Friday the 13th after the close. It still trades the futures, and it was down over 100 points. And I think most people who have followed the markets or have been in the markets for a long time would have said that you would have expected a huge drop on Monday everywhere in the world, including the US. And that happened here in London. The Dow futures was down, over 150 points before the US opening. And then it just started creeping up and finished the day up more than 200 points, about 250 points. I remember very well because I've worked over 20 years in the markets as a broker, futures and options broker. The day of 9/11, the day after 9/11, the market shut down in the US, and they were shut for another week or so. And then when the market reopened, the Dow collapsed for the next couple of days. It didn't go up by 400, 500 points. So it's very strange how these markets are reacting. The Dow finished near 18,000 this week, about 17,820. The all-time high is 18,360 or thereabouts, and so we're very near the highs. And the Dow's had the best week in 13 months, and that's after a terrorist attack that's comparable to 9/11 in Paris. And that's also, with all the worries now that the rest of the West, i.e. London or New York or Chicago, might be attacked by terrorists, and it just doesn't make sense. The other thing that is quite interesting is that a lot of the other markets, for example, like the FTSE 100 in the UK, that's about more than 600 points off its all-time highs, almost 10%. So with the Dow very near its all-time highs, it seems like a divergence, especially when the people are expecting the Fed to raise interest rates on the 16th of December at their FOMC meeting. It just seems very weird. The other thing we noted yesterday, Friday the 20th, Zero Hedge reported that the Federal Reserve announced yesterday afternoon that they were going to hold an expedited meeting on Monday the 23rd at 11:30 Eastern Time in the States. and it would be behind the door or closed meeting. I'm not sure if this is a normal meeting they hold, the board of the Fed, but it just seems a bit strange that they've called for kind of an emergency meeting. Of course, we don't know what it's about, and we probably won't know what it was about even after the fact, because it's supposed to be a secret or behind closed doors. What else has happened? The US dollar is strengthened quite a bit this week. The dollar index, DXY, is almost up to 100. We've had Mario Draghi of the ECB, talking the euro down again. So the euro is at a 106 handle, very weak. The yen is usually, holding up above that 120 level, and every time the Dow seems to weaken a little bit, we see the dollar getting strong against the yen. It's what Zero Hedge always say, it's the REM pop on the dollar yen that helps all risk assets like the stock market. What else has been happening? Well, as far as the UK is concerned, we had the PSNBR, which is the public sector borrowing requirements, which is basically the budget deficit, and the budget deficit for October was £2 billion worse than expected. So that has hurt the British pound, and even though the economy in the UK is supposed to be doing very well, and unemployment being so low, and GDP being one of the best in Europe, for some reason Mr. Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or Finance Minister, can't seem to get the budget under control. The budget deficit in the UK is still around 5% of GDP. The budget deficit in Germany is non-existent. They have a budget balance, and their GDP is about 1.6 or 2%, just like ours. But if you subtract the budget deficit in the UK, which is 5% of GDP, our economy is actually in a recession, negative GDP. What that means is that it's the government spending, overspending, that's keeping the statistics in the black. And we're being told that by everyone in the mainstream that the UK is running an austerity campaign. So how come, the deficit is still running strongly, 5% of GDP, and how come the national debt is still, soaring and way above 1.5 trillion, and it was just below 1 trillion, I think 900 billion when the Tories came to power. They haven't cut anything. The thing with these comments in the media, and by everyone basically, mainstream and the government and the opposition, Labour, that the Conservatives are implementing austerity and that everything is being cut, that's a fallacy. Because when in the UK, when chancellors come with their budget plans, they usually plan in advance, 4 or 5 years. They plan increases in some departments, in defense or health. They plan those ahead of time. They say, these first 2 years, the budget for the NHS will increase by 8%, and then the third year will increase by 10, for example. So it's all planned and all set in budgets. Most people think, this is just a budget for this year, but it's not. So when the Tories came into power in 2010, they said, people were saying, and they came out with their budget. People were saying, they're cutting, but they weren't. All they're doing is they were revising some of the plans laid out by the previous chancellors, Darling and Gordon Brown, who was chancellor before he became prime minister. All they were doing was, Mr. Osborne is revising some of the plans from the past. And they were cutting rates of increases. They weren't actually cutting anything in real terms. And that's why we still have a huge budget deficit. And the other thing people seem never to talk about, and they're always blaming, the welfare state and benefits and people on benefits. And I do not believe in the efficiency of a welfare state. I think the state should be, small and lean. But as the system is, you cannot blame the welfare state and benefits for the majority of the increase in the budget deficit and in the debt. We have to look at all the hundreds of billions that had to be borrowed into existence to save the banking system in the UK. Don't forget, the banking system almost melted down in 07, 08. And it didn't start in 08, it started in 07. If you remember Northern Rock, that collapsed in 07. So hundreds of billions had to be borrowed into existence on the back of the UK taxpayer to prevent the banking system from imploding in the UK. And hundreds of billions also have been earmarked to support the mortgage market in the UK. So, yes, maybe because there's so many people out of work and people are earning a lot less, they're having to claim more benefits, and that has, there's less people paying tax and the tax receipts are not as big because people are not earning as much. Yes, that has made a difference, but don't forget all the debt that was incurred by saving the banks, and that seems to be something no one ever points at. And and the other point being is, if the UK economy is doing so well, unemployment is so low, 20 years ago, interest rates would have been around 5-6%, the Bank of England rate, and right now it's basically at 0 or 0.5%. And we've been told that there's no inflation, so they can afford to keep rates at these near zero levels until 2017. But I heard yesterday on the radio, LBC, that rental rates in the London area have gone up by 10% in the last year. So how can inflation be low when rental rates are going up by 10%, when a big chunk of people are now renting after the great financial crisis because people can't afford to buy homes, even though mortgage rates are, fairly low, considering, the official base rate is at 0. Just seems quite confusing. We're being told that there's no inflation, but rental rates are going up. Rents are going up by 10%. I'm sure they do not include rents in the CPI, because if they did, CPI wouldn't be near 0, would it? So that's very strange. The pound did take a hit after those budget deficit numbers that came out on Thursday, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Thursday the 19th. And I think also it's being dragged down also with the euro, the pound, even though the pound has outperformed the euro in the last 2.5 years or so. And most people, in this country actually say, oh, the pound's very strong against the euro. I'm not a proponent of joining the euro, but if you look back in 07, 08, a pound would buy €1.60. Right now it will buy €1.30. So the pound actually in the on a long-term basis has been devalued against the euro, even though everyone thinks it's the euro that's collapsing. I know 2-3 years ago the pound almost, you know, the euro almost dropped to 1-to-1 against the pound, but and you know, the pound has recovered by 30% almost. But looking back to 07-08, the pound's dropped like 20% against the euro, and has also dropped about 25% against the dollar. I remember the pound, or cable as they call it in the city, being almost 2 to the dollar back in before 07. So we've actually devalued. What else? So yeah, we're approaching Monday, and we'll have to see what happens in terms of the terrorist story. You know, that's all we seem to hear in the media. Very strange. I mean, not strange, but expected. And it's like a flood of news just on terrorism, and then people seem to forget any other kind of news. And that's it. I'll talk to you later.